So this is going over chapter 3 of the Ethics Code, and here we'll be looking at the Ethics Code and how we'll go about making ethical decisions. You know how many institutions carries a mission statement. Well, in our field, there's something that we strive toward in our quest to be able to provide the services that's appropriate for our clientele. Our preamble within the Ethics Code states that the development of a dynamic set of ethical standards for psychologists' work-related conduct requires a personal commitment and lifelong effort to act ethically, to encourage ethical behavior by students, supervisees, employees, and colleagues, and to consult with others concerning ethical problems. So you recall last week when we were speaking about in which there was the vignette that looked at how one psychologist was approached by his patient in terms of another client who just so happens to be a sex worker, and they didn't realize that they were actually having sex with a therapist and paying for it, and the therapist there was paying for it that worked in another department. So we discussed different ways on how we might handle that, but if we just go over what I just stated, if we went by the fact that we encourage ethical behaviors, not only of ourselves, not only of supervisors and other employees as well, but colleagues as well. Even though you didn't work with that colleague directly, that psychologist did do some work for them in terms of referrals, that made them a colleague. So therefore, in that vignette, it's our responsibility to ensure that they are working to their highest degree ethically. And in terms of looking at those ethical problems, we have to be able to address them. So ethical commitment is talking about how we have to push ourselves to be able to do what should be considered as right. And this reflects on how we apply, how we look at it and how we apply the ethics codes, the principles, as well as the standards in terms of looking at scientific and or the professional context. It's not a sometimes issue that we deal with. It's where we need to work it within our construct all the time, both scientifically as well as professionally. When we discuss the ethical commitment, we have to also look at one's belief systems, or virtues, so to speak. Not only are you dealing with your own personal virtues, but there is hopefully a professional level of virtue that you would work toward. And more or less, when we speak about virtue in ethics, we're talking about how there's our belief system that starts as our foundation that will hopefully help us to elevate ourselves when we look at our virtues professionally. When we're in terms of knowing what's right than what's wrong, and allow that to guide us in how we would make decisions. So some requisites that is necessary for us as psychologists would be, first one, conscientiousness. Here, Fisher talks about how a conscientious psychologist would be motivated to do what's going to be right diligently, and I'm stressing diligently, trying to determine what would be right, and to be able to make reasonable attempts to do the right thing, as well as be committed in lifelong professional growth and process. And when we talk about lifelong professional growth and process here, we're speaking about your level of competency, being able to continue to enhance your abilities. You're always going to be looking to become more conscientious of your surroundings, of your clientele in terms of diversity. You will look within yourself to learn more about those you're going to work with. that's the type of things when we're speaking about conscientiousness. And then, of course, discernment is talking about how a discerning psychologist would bring contextually and relationally sensitive insight, provide good judgment, as well as appropriately detach the understanding to be able to determine what is right. You got to be able to look at it objectively. We work is always saying evidence-based, but we also have to know that we have to remain objective. And it's not always hard when we're talking about ethical decision making, in the sense that we're going to have subjective influences at times because of our own personal experiences. And we need to know how to differentiate between the two. Prudence is talking about how we would apply that practical wisdom of the competence of everything that we've learned toward those ethical challenges, and how it will help us to kind of come up with the right solutions that would be able to assist in the problem that we're dealing with, as well as those people that we're working with in all. And not only your clients is in consideration, but as mentioned, we look at our colleagues, we look at our clients we go to work with to make improvements and stay ethically sound with them, as well as for myself, it would be with students, for you, clients, and wherever you may go, whatever level you work with. In your research, you're going to want to make sure you're going to be able to provide these same type of issues working toward these issues in terms of how you deal with your participants. Do we make sure there's no bias involved, and so forth. So those are the three requisites that we want to kind of make sure we keep striving to do. And it's not always an easy task, because each situation, you're going to find its own set of challenges within it. This slide kind of represents what we as psychologists have to truly push even more so today due to recent events than anything else. And that's speaking about openness. As we know, openness is being characterized as a personal and professional commitment to applying a multicultural framework, and showing genuine interest in understanding what others are going through, experiencing, as well as those cultural differences that's between you and your client. Having a clear understanding and not just going by the paper, the copy and paste type things that we might see, as far as knowing what those general shoulds, as Fisher would call it, would be. And what is she talking about, those shoulds? You know, we work toward being politically correct. But sometimes, even when you're being politically correct, you can find yourself still being insensitive to the needs of your client. It's not a cookie cutter approach. We have to look at the individual, what their cultural background is, what their cultural experiences would be, and how it would relate and influence how we would provide treatment for that client. If you don't have a clue about the person sitting before you, then how do you feel you can truly help them? In terms of our field in psychology, we work toward an understanding of the person before us, and that means we may have to do some research prior to meeting with them. If it's a particular group that you've never worked with, then you're going to want to have some general understanding. When I worked in Alaska, for example, I had to do a lot of work prior to even seeing my first set of patients. I was going around throughout the town because it was a very small one. It was actually a village, but they'll argue it was a small city or town. And this was in Dillingham, Alaska. But prior to me even starting to meet with people, I allowed myself a 2-week period just to go around town and say hello to people, find out about their ways, their customs, try to gain some understanding of what they see as the world as it is. So that when I sat before them and started taking on clients and meeting with them one-on-one, at least I wasn't looking like a deer that's, got the headlights and freezing. And when I wasn't sure about how to approach a situation because of their culture, then I would make sure I consult. It's extremely important that you want to consult, consult, consult. And I told you you're going to hear me say this all semester long. But this is the reasons why. This is another reason why it would be important. Because if you're working with a particular group that you have no experience working with them, you're not going to want to just provide them with therapy that you've done with one group and know that that's okay, it's an evidence-based program that I'm using. I know that this has worked with this group, but if you didn't do your research to find out whether or not it would work for that particular group. I worked with Alaskan natives, and I can tell you I had to come based upon a collectivistic approach, not individual, but see things collectively, because the family unit, their tribe, was their main component in terms of how they dealt with life. So when a person came to me talking about their being depressed, or unfortunately there's a high rate of suicide in Alaska. Dealt with seasonal affective disorder. But I couldn't approach it mainly one-on-one. I had to allow them to be able to see the lens through how their life is, their worldviews, how the family is important for them. I had to also allow myself to realize that although I want to help this one person, it's going to take more than just treating the one person. I had to treat the family as a whole, help them understand what that family member was going through, and how they can assist them in terms of providing them with the support that they would need in order to improve their mental health. So we have to use this core virtue when we're dealing with multiculturalism. It's that commitment to being able to apply a multicultural lens, as said on the slide, when we're motivated, and you have to be genuine about it. Like I said, cookie cutter approach is not going to work, because a person, you'll lose that rapport quick when they think you're just trying to throw the book at them. A sense of genuineness. You might want to think about it in terms of looking at it as a humanistic approach. Unconditional positive regard. You want to be able again to understand how others are going to react based upon what's going on in their lives, not simply what's going on in what you're accustomed to seeing. You step yourself a little bit beyond. So finally, just to reiterate, Fisher's thought in the textbook talks about how this is reflecting this strong desire to be able to understand how culture is really, truly relevant in terms of identifying and helping to resolve any type of ethical challenges in regards to our research, as well as how we work with others. Looking at these cultural differences to help provide ourselves definitions in terms of group characteristics, looking at one's reality, understanding institutionalized racism, how it's systemic. And like I said, right now we are dealing with a situation which America is in an uproar. It's in an uproar because we have two sides that's being looked at right now. And having people understand where blacks are coming from in terms of fear of law enforcement and how to be able to make changes. You hear people arguing, oh, they have to defund the police department. You have to do this, you have to do that. Well, we also have to understand one thing. And as a black person, I can admit there's always a conflict. As a professional, I see objectively how there's two cultures I'm looking at in terms of how I might want to work and deal with this situation. Ethically speaking, I have to be able to look objectively at the two. In terms of Black people, there is anxiety, there is fear, there's anger due to a historic influence that continues well over 400 years. Then I also have to look at the culture of law enforcement. What is it that creates these isms, so to speak, as far as racism, in terms of dealing with the public? Why do we find that the stereotypes is what's leading some people? Because there's an automatic feeling that in terms of dealing with the Black culture, that they have to be on guard, and it's based upon stereotypes that's been driven in and driven home on a continuous basis. And although as a Black person I'm angry, I'm afraid, because I have sons and I continuously worry about them. And not only just, let me change that, because it's not only Black men that's affected or impacted. Black women have been impacted too. I give you a prime example. About 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago, right after George Floyd's killing, my stepdaughter, who was at a hotel in Ridgeland, was approached by a police officer simply because she was sitting in her car having a cigarette. She was staying at a hotel there at the time. And they was like, well, we need to search your car. And she said, well, officer, I don't understand. What did I do? And the officer never gave her an explanation. He's like, well, it's late. You're sitting in the car. We've had people say that, you know, there have been carjackings and so forth, so we're just checking things out. But they never gave a reason why they needed to search her vehicle. She called my husband, and of course he got upset, because he's like, okay, see, here we go again, this problem when it's unnecessary. We spoke to the officer to kind of find out what was going on, and he didn't provide any real explanation. But I do understand that not every law enforcement officer has it out for a Black person. I do understand that. But the problem is, because there are so many cases of this occurring throughout our nation, and it doesn't appear to have any type of resolution at hand, we cannot see, the bad apples are just basically taking over the whole tree. It's rotten everything to the core. You may have good apples there, but once you bite into a bad apple, it's kind of difficult for you to want to go and pick another apple from the tree. So it's hard in terms of our ethical obligations. It's going to be hard sometimes to be able to discern that we have to be able to work. I may receive a call saying, well, Dr. Kearns-Cooper, we need you to come and do a lecture with our police officers to kind of help them learn how to do de-escalation. I have to be able to provide that service and put my feelings aside, because the ultimate goal is, if I want to be an agent of change, I can't allow my personal feelings to influence the job at hand. Will I express my concerns? Probably, but not to the point where I'm inflicting all my feelings and saying this is how it's got to be because of what I feel. And that's the hard part in terms of when we're making decisions and making sure we're aware of our feelings, but being considerate and aware of others. So now a question that always come up with some debate for some is asking the question about whether virtues can be taught. As I mentioned, a lot when we're talking about being virtuous, a lot of that stems from what experiences we've had throughout our lifetime and how it will relate as we learn the ethics code. Can virtues be taught? I would say yes. You can be taught what, as we are doing in this course, what are the expectations? It is up to you to follow them. And although I can't change your belief system 100%, I can still present you with the facts and hope that based upon your personal experiences, that you allow yourself to develop your professional attitude and be able to enhance yourself to follow the principles and the standards of the ethics code. So where we're talking about is as a senior member, as a person with some experiences, me sharing my different experiences as a professional will hopefully guide you into learning how to develop your own sense of virtue professionally. And that you would go in, as I mentioned last week, I was saying to you, I want y'all to start giving yourself familiarity in terms of looking at the different codes. When you approach the vignettes, start looking at which codes that you're going to utilize when answering the different questions that's presented to you. The more that you can do this through practice, the better that it'll turn out to be. It is in hopes that not only are we going to improve your abilities of being a great psychologist, but that it's going to help to enhance all the different aspects of who you are. If you allow yourself, if you're one that have a sense of morality and you want to see what's right done for others, remember, we try our best not to do harm. We try to provide respect and dignity. That saying, do unto others as we do unto ourselves, is a big thing that you can utilize in this particular issue of knowing about virtues. I can argue that a lot of people have to also learn what humility is. And humility can be connected to how your virtues would be ethically. When we take time to improve ourselves, being aware, understanding our setbacks, our flaws, knowing how to look beyond and say, okay, being able to ask yourself the question, is what I'm doing going to help a person or will it inhibit a person? Your character is definitely on the line. When you take the hat and put the psychologist hat on, metaphorically speaking, but it's one of the major roles you're taking on. That role is saying that you will be following and using as a guiding tool the ethics code. That you will be first and foremost there for your client. That you will be first and foremost ensuring their safety, providing them with privacy, confidentiality. You will not do harm. Virtues, when practiced, can be enhanced. So that's where I'm going to leave it at that. All right, so I spoke about morality as far as personal speaking, but in all, I'll wrap this and it's going to keep moving toward our ethical awareness and how it's intertwined with our moral principles. We have to be able to see how different situations would have to take on ethical consideration. Meaning, every time you deal with something professionally, you should be actually ensuring that everything that's being done, every step that you take, you're doing it ethically, that you're following the ethics code, that you are making sure that you're crossing those T's and dotting those I's in terms of the principles and standards. Morality, we all have our own sense of morality. We all have our thoughts of what we think should be correct and what we think might be wrong. But in terms of our morality and working with our ethics, then there's that intertwine that we have to make sure is balanced. Again, you don't want to inject everything you think is right, but you want to ensure that you're following the guide of performing the way you should. And sometimes that means becoming quite rigid, actually. Many times it's where sometimes I get tunnel vision in terms of how I worked with my clients. I wanted to make sure that I did not step to the wrong side. So I ensured that by utilizing the ethics code. When I worked with a person, did I explain everything to them so that they had a clear understanding and that there was nothing hidden from them? Did I provide them with the opportunity to say, no, I do not wish to have this, and they have the right to say it? That's not only in doing therapy, but in research. As you know, when you're doing research and you're gathering participants, subjects for your study, you give them the options and let them know that it's voluntary. It's not something that they're forced to do. Because we know, historically speaking, we've had studies conducted where people didn't realize that they had the right to say no. Tuskegee is one that just pops in my head. So it's important that we identify a situation that's warranting an ethical consideration and that we're aware of the moral values of the discipline, not of ourselves, but of the discipline. What is right or wrong according to the field of psychology? So we're going to look at the next slide that's looking at ethical awareness and then start talking about the general principles. All right, so as you can see, we have 5 different principles that we strive toward. Okay. Principle A, beneficence and non-maleficence. Here, the virtues we hope that you have or have to enhance and improve upon would be being able to be compassionate, be non-malevolent. You're not going to want to hurt no one. Be prudent in terms of working with somebody and making sure and ensuring that the ethic code is being applied, as well as humane. We should be able to identify the best interests for those we're working with and understand that we have to ensure the welfare of others and minimize any type of harm that might come to them. And that's, as a student, my responsibility is to ensure not only that you're becoming competent in this area, but that I do so ethically, that I teach you the dynamics in the correct manner that's going to help you to be elevated. In terms of me working with clients, I'm going to ensure that the therapy that I provide is not going to be detrimental to their mental health or their health for that matter. The same can hold true in terms of research. We have to follow these strict guidelines that allows us to make sure we're taking care of our client first and foremost. Principle B is looking at fidelity and responsibility. Here, those virtues are hopefully going to be about being faithful to your profession, faithful to your clients. You'll be dependable. And here's what I want to say about dependability. When we talk about dependability, Imagine coming to an appointment and you don't, say you had to meet with a doctor. You was going in for a physical. You know how you get scheduled and then all of a sudden you're there and they're not. One of the things I struggle with this semester is a difficult one because we're all online and it's been difficult to do any type of live meetings as I would hope. So I struggle with, am I being dependable? Well, the way I try to compensate for that is to make sure that I give you these video lectures so that you are still receiving the information that I would relate to you if we were in a live meeting. That's dependability. Being able to come up with solutions that's going to still be ethically correct. If you have a client come, when you start seeing clients in the clinic, you don't want to be late for your appointment. Having a client sit and wait, then they can't depend on you to meet their goals. Trust starts to weaken. You also got to have the virtue of conscientiousness, thinking about others, not only of yourself. And be, again, committed to professional growth by always realizing and understanding that this field that we are in, you have now become a lifelong learner. That you're going to always make sure that you're working toward understanding any type of new innovations, new theories, and new complexities of the field. So we have to be aware of our obligations to our clients, to the community, how it's going to affect our ability to work with them, as well as looking and making sure that we're following professional rules, as well as following any type of obligations that's mandated by law. Principle C is looking at integrity. Integrity, quite simple when we look at the virtues. Are you being honest with your clients? You know, sometimes when the client is having a difficult situation, we often are afraid, especially if they're suicidal. Therapists have been initially afraid to actually speak frank about the situation that's at hand. So much so that they're afraid to ask the question, are you thinking of harming yourself? They'll definitely try not to say the word kill themselves, because there's a fear that, oh, if I put this in their mind, then quite possibly I'm initiating them making an attempt. Well, research has been able to demonstrate that's not the case. We definitely want to be able to allow a client, a person, to know that in our efforts to help them, that we hear them and that we are seeing something that they might not realize we see, or they might not realize it for themselves. So we have to be direct and honest. Again, reliability. In order to build a strong rapport, you have to be reliable. If you stress that this is a thing you want to do and work on in terms of therapy, then that's what you need to do. And if you have to deviate, at least be able to share why. Being reliable is being able to provide them with all the information that they will need that's going to help guide them into gaining insight, improving their judgment, and so forth. Other virtue within this is being genuine. Be real. Trust me, your clients will know if you're trying to fake that funk. They get it every time. And all it does is damage the professional relationship between the two of you. So you want to know what's going to be possible before making any type of professional commitments. Don't promise something if you can't keep that promise. Doesn't make sense to do that. Identify when it's necessary to be able to correct any kind of misconceptions, or if there is some mistrust. Because granted, you're going to have times when clients come before you and they won't trust you. I expressed and shared last week, talked about the client I worked with who identified himself as a skinhead. There was no trust there initially. And I can't say honestly that he trusted me at the end, but he relied on me enough to work with him. He relied on me enough to be honest and genuine. And yes, when he spoke about the N-word, I spoke about my dislike to it and made him think about why I disliked it. Made him think about why it would, a person emote any type of negative feelings, and got his opinion on what he thought. Though that's being genuine and making sure that, again, I'm aware about myself in the situation. Thankfully, I was able to be prudent, and I was able to discern and detach my personal feelings and remain responsible. That's what integrity is about. And of course, Principle D looks at justice. And that's talking about being open, being fair, judicious, understanding the complexity and ambiguity, knowing when and how to handle those things. We need to be able to identify vulnerabilities of a person or a particular group. Understand that our actions, if we do not do our jobs correctly, we can actually exploit a situation. And we need to be able to recognize that and be able to handle and resolve situations that would not lead to manipulation or exploitation. We do not want to practice unfairly and practice with unjust. Again, thinking of this situation that we're in now, in which the country has come to arms, is what I call it. And I've always expressed, having conversations with others, that, we're closely coming to a new civil war. And seeing the recent events and how it's building, it's that water is boiling over. That water represents the anger, the frustrations, the fears, and how it's boiling over, the misunderstanding, the misconceptions. Those are ingredients for creating what I say is another revolution. And we're seeing how people are going about that series through the series of incidents that have been happening. So as a psychologist, I need to be just, I need to be fair, I need to be open, I need to be listening. I need to be able to express my amount of understanding or the lack thereof. Principle E is looking at the respect for people's rights and dignity. And those virtues: be considerate, be respectful, again, do unto others as you would want them to do unto you, so to speak, in how you treat a person. We do put safeguards in place in order to protect one's autonomy, their privacy, respecting the fact that they are a human being, and that we respect that they come from different cultures and that they have differences and uniqueness that should be respected. Allow them to know that they're valid in this world. That's what respect for dignity, rights, and the people's rights and dignity is about. All right, so now, and I kind of hinted to this as well, in your text, there's a case example that's talking about how we would handle deception research. First and foremost, when we talk about deception research, again, why would we be deceiving a person while we're doing research? Well, we understand that sometimes if we present clients with material that it might provide, and we explain the true nature of the research, then we may not get the accuracy of the data that we're trying to collect. We understand that there are times that it's important for deception to occur in research, and that, yeah, this is still going to be up for a debate ethically, because depending on the level, that's why we have institutional review boards that helps guide us, because they'll help follow our ethics code. We have to make sure that we are doing the least amount of harm. Therefore, whatever it is that you're working on in terms of research, if it's where deception is necessary, and only if it's necessary to be able to get any true data to be collected, we also know that we have to debrief an individual immediately afterwards. So Fisher talks about deception in research and how there might be a consent paradox. And the consent paradox is talking about how we're asking them to participate in a study where they're thinking about it in one way, but the study is actually reflecting a different way. And that's where the paradox is, because we're kind of not being honest if you think about it. But there is also the understanding that without this level of deception, we won't learn anything, because people are either going to try to fake good, fake bad. They're not going to respond because they don't want the perception of their responses to be where they're looked down upon in any kind of way. But the main thing I want to say here is just remember, if deception is required, then you have to debrief a person immediately after they complete the study. When the experiment's over, there's no, okay, well, they can read about it. I'll send a report out and they can read about it. No, you have to let them know right after they're finished, so that you can deter from any type of mishap or misconception that might have occurred during the research. There are several different ethical theories that would have come up with different conclusions and talking about moral acceptability of deceptive research. Some people feel we shouldn't be using it at all. That if you can't express and get the information that's required and needed by telling them the truth, that we shouldn't even be approaching it. But then there are some situations in which, without the deception in research, we wouldn't make the strides that we have made in terms of interventions and treatment. So as we further discuss deception in research, you have to look at a couple of theories here, those being deontology and Kantian ethics. In deontology, a person, Kant describes them as being an absolutist, or they be universal as well as impersonal. Here, it's rational thinking that's going to be applied universally to all the principles and the different situations, irrespective of specific relationships, context, or consequences. In deontology, we're looking at being a little bit more rigid, so to speak. In terms of a Kantian perspective, deception in research is not ethically permissible, because pretty much the thought is we're intentionally disguising the nature of the study for the goals of research, and that in itself would be a moral violation in respect to looking at the intrinsic worth of a participant. And ultimately, can't believe that we are demoralizing and undermining a person's right to make a rational or autonomous consent in terms of whether or not they want to participate in one's research. So there's evidence on both sides that could be considered valid. On one end, we learned that if we give everything to the person who's in the study, then there might be, like when we talk about self-reports, we may not get the true answers that are needed in order to make the appropriate determinations in the development of a theory or of an intervention. However, same can hold true that by not providing a person with their rights to be able to choose to tell us that, are we truly being ethical? Again, in this area, it's really hard, and we're walking a fine line, but it's important for us to be able to gain an understanding that if we use deception in any context of our research, that we do so with the knowledge that this form of deception is not going to be a point to where we're harming the client that is detrimental to their health, that is detrimental to their mental health, but that it is actually going to assist us to evolve the particular situation in coming up with true theory that would help it. So always know we are on a tightrope in terms of what we do and how we do it. But we have to always lean toward being ethically correct, and that we're following those principles in our quest to discovery. So, of course, I guess this is a week of philosophical thought, in that we discuss for philosophy in terms of learning and cognition, and now we're going to talk about it here within ethics. We're going to look at a couple of ethical theories: utilitarianism or consequentialism. So, first and foremost, utilitarians, they held holds a hedonistic act in terms of consequentialism, and that pretty much is in terms of being calm that the act is going to be morally right, if and only if that the act maximizes the good. That is, if only the total amount of good for all the minus the total amount of bad for all that's going to be greater than the net amount for any type of act that we would say is incompatible, like deception research that's available to that particular occasion. So in terms of hedonism, this is claiming that pleasure is the only intrinsic good and that pain is going to be intrinsically bad. And these claims are going to be, it summarizes that slogan in terms of the act of right if, and only if it causes the greatest happiness for the greatest number. And that slogan pretty much, that's a misleading thought in itself, but it can, the act can increase happiness for most. In terms of this, happiness is in the form of gathering the correct type of data that's needed in the research study. But still, it may fail to maximize the net good in the world if the smaller number of participants, for example, that their happiness wouldn't be increased, or that they lose much more than the greater number that would be gained. So the principle of utility in this case would not allow this kind of sacrifice for a smaller number than a greater number, unless that net good would be able to increase more than any kind of alternative. So this is different than deontology because of what it denies. It's denying the moral rightness that depends directly on anything other than the consequences, like whether the agent promised in the past to do the act now. But of course, the fact remains that the agent or participant or a researcher promises to do the act, a researcher actually, indirectly to affect the act's consequences if breaking the promise will make anybody else unhappy. So because of this, let's just go ahead and wrap it up and make it a little clearer. Ethical decision making is governed by this risk-benefit calculus. And from this perspective, we have to see that here deception research again is on the fence, in that it could be either permissible or impermissible depending on which side you take it on.